I never expected to say out loud my property was raided, not by real law enforcement, but by people pretending to be enforcement. The reason? An HOA dispute. Sounds small. It wasn't. They showed up in vests, with guns, radios, and a clipboard that looked official except everything about it was fake. They thought they were walking into a trap. They walked into mine. Let me begin at the start. Before we get started, let me know where you're listening from. Ever pursue a dream so long that when you catch up to it, you don't even believe it? That was me. A porch I built with my own hands, coffee grown by someone else, 120 acres purchased with sweat and scars. No bosses. No 4 a.m. calls. Just goats, dogs, a tractor that predated my knees, and a hush that felt like home. I figured conflict was done when I purchased this ranch. I was mistaken. It started with a white plastic sign zip-tied to my fence. Notice, property under review. Simmons Valley HOA compliance required. I gazed at it, ripped it off, and threw it in the burn barrel, thinking of teenagers playing HOA cosplay. Misstep number 1, underestimating how far a person will go when they think a clipboard is all-powerful. Misstep number 2, assuming Karen would quit. SUV of hospital wall color stopped halfway down my gravel driveway the next day. Out came Karen Simmons in hot pink creased khakis, mirrored shades, clipboard clutched like a sidearm. "Hi there," chirped Karen, beaming like we were exchanging banana bread recipes. "Karen Simmons, HOA president. Just making my rounds. Welcome to the neighborhood," I chuckled. "This is farmland," I told her. She didn't flinch. "Our bylaws address fencing height, building types, livestock proportion, and noise levels. Citations start next month." She handed a manila envelope stamped "Welcome Packet, Action Required," spun on her heel, and disappeared. Inside, page after page of phony regulations, drawing of my barn, red circle photographs of fencing angles I never even knew existed. I burned it. 2 days later, larger laminated signs nailed to my barn door. "Under enforcement review, violations pending." I ripped them down. This time they returned with nails and men. 2 khaki-clad men, vests ironed with HOA patrol badges, patrolled my fence like it was a drill. One gestured toward my tractor and spoke into a mic. I came off my porch and asked if I needed anything. Nervous and scripted. "We're doing a compliance sweep pursuant to HOA policy." They displayed a badge reading Simmons Valley Charter. I informed them they were trespassing under the Callahan Property Charter. They departed, but one discarded clipboard showed patrol maps bearing red X's. My property was marked Alpha, high resistance. I took its photo and contacted a sheriff deputy acquaintance. He had never heard of an HOA undertaking such. He knew Karen. "She attempted to have the feed store closed last year," he told me. That was when I knew this wasn't random. Karen had an agenda, doctored websites, patrols, laminated codes, and men who believed paperwork was power. I prepared. Motion detectors, trail cams, remote lights. Not anything deadly, but enough to tell anyone who violated my boundary that this land bites back. They arrived before sunrise, quiet. The air was off, the kind of silence that says trouble is attempting to remain silent. I heard the crunch of synchronized steps. 5 silhouettes on the east fence, headlamps, vests, radios, a clipboard. Team Alpha in position. "Start sweep. Target assumed armed but cooperative under Phase 1, a radio crackled. I laughed at the absurdity, and then the laugh stopped. Something inside of me clicked. The old training returned. I was moved by muscle memory. A tripwire was tripped, and then boom. Not an explosion, but the rest. Flood lamps, alarms, commotion, and light so abrupt it was as if God's own spotlight. 2 men fell. Linda, my goat, bucked and knocked one over. I walked out onto the porch and took a sip of warmed-over coffee. "Good morning," I said. "Y'all announcing yourselves or expecting surprise?" Clipboard guy claimed they were authorized by community vote on an emergency code. I took his folder and discovered draft pages, coffee stains, melted cheese glued to a corner, fake, amateurish. Then a sheriff cruiser pulled up. Sheriff Langston approached, deadpan. "Callahan, what the devil's going on here?" He read the do-it-yourself compliance manual, classes in fencing misalignment, illicit rooster activity, aggressive resident behavior, and called it cultish. Karen didn't cave after the arrests. She doubled down. Flyers, Aerial drone views of my property. Zone B non-compliant, plastic stakes marking the road entrance. Laminated letters in mailboxes. Resident classification. Tier 3. Critical non-compliant. Take livestock away. Paint barn neutral gray. Go to re-education in Karen's garage. Individuals who'd waved stopped looking at each other. Feed prices crept up unobtrusively. A neighbor posted to the community group. We favor order. Social ostracism began to take on a sense of reality. Then the rally. No permits, a fold-out table, a microphone, and a board saying Emergency Compliance Briefing Tier 3 Response. Karen clutched a flyer with my picture and denounced me. This resident has declined compliance, she stated. We're initiating community isolation protocol. People nodded. Some clapped. She'd built followers. Things escalated. Trail cameras cut. A white sedan with no tags idled 2 properties down. Max, my border collie, came back with a bleeding paw, jagged glass in the barn. A message. Langston said it wasn't an accident. I went public. Video of the fake raid, fake warrants, the flyers, Max's injury, surveillance logs, the HOA's law book. The video blew up 300,000 views in 24 hours. People who'd defended Karen online vanished. Half her compliance team resigned. But she wasn't finished. 2 days after that, Karen appeared on my doorstep with a manila folder filled with printed emails, signed memos, and something titled Regional Initiative. Rural Behavioral Management Phase 2. Government stamps. People I knew? This wasn't a local HOA costume party. This involved agencies and contractors. Someone with influence was paying her. Langston, county detectives, the state attorney, they all jumped into it quickly. A warrant was issued. They broke into Karen's home and discovered a bogus bookshelf panel covering access to a back office, binders wall to wall, a whiteboard of names and faces, maps, charts for rotation, a row of monitors, one was my barn, binders titled Resident Tier Guide, Psychological Reinforcement Tactics, Asset Conversion Model, Phase 3. My file, patterns, schedules, notes. They were identifying and plotting removals. This was psychological warfare masquerading as community standards. They indicted Karen on criminal harassment, wire fraud, impersonating an official illegal surveillance, conspiracy to defraud. But the greater horror was what investigators uncovered. A list of names with my name stamped red, obstructionist, high threat, and others targeted for persuasion or relocation. It was organized, aimed, and it extended beyond Simmons Valley. It got worse. Another raid on them yielded forged IDs, training manuals, citizen arrest badges, and a team photo with Karen in the center under the heading Phase 4, Ground Team Unit 7. There were at least half a dozen more units. A drive named Phase 4 Contingency was encrypted. Phase 3 was control. Phase 4 was escalation. The drone reappeared at 4:12 a.m., a whine, quicker and smarter. A singed circle defined my north boundary, a mark they had placed on other non-compliant properties. Then 3 guys came up my driveway in darkness. Clipboards and rifles, actual guns. Clipboard guy handed me a sheet asserting forfeiture under Emergency Clause B9. They believed forms made it legitimate. I activated the rig I'd installed just in case. Steel strips rose, strobe lights, frequency-coded alarms, flash bangs that disoriented. I closed the distance on a rifle holder, disarmed him, and Langston's cruiser rolled in silence. 7 were arrested. One calm man, smiling through the bars, whispered, "Phase 4 isn't about you. You're the prototype." He winked. They'd been testing me. Behind the station, documents were fabricated and further entanglements. A retired intelligence officer's signature on a Phase 2 proposal. Contractors, shell nonprofits such as Community Horizon Outreach, bank trails and funding? The tale came to public attention. Oversight hearings commenced. Karen was indicted anew on federal charges. The program behind it, OPRM, Operational Rural Management, was on paper decommissioned. Ideology lingered, however. Max still limps. The goats still shout. The fence keeps. But waiting is the hardest. The watchfulness never departs. Trucks creep by the gate and Max barks. I still receive calls from strangers who discovered the same strategy on their property. My standard tip? Don't wait for someone to do your battle. If a map is created, you're already marked. The final drive on my desk marked Callahan rested for days. Inside, a logo familiar to me, OPRM, not HOA, federal. The folders described the cycle I'd witnessed: infiltration, conditioning, pressure, correction. Next, a tape of Karen reciting a confession. If you're watching this, you saw the truth. I didn't start it, but I believed in it. The screen flickered black. I didn't dash to the press next. I submitted a federal whistleblower complaint, redacted names of neighbors, appended all files. Then I posted. Former workers emerged. Oversight hearings began. The program was revealed. Karen was charged with federal crimes. The drive made people see, but the machine wasn't gone. The final encrypted email we broke had coordinates tagged Midwest Beta, colder, flatter, easy to make people vanish. Phase 4 hadn't ended, it was advancing. If there's a lesson in this fiasco, systems designed to control communities can be turned against them. When bureaucracy appears as power, it can be used as a force of displacement and control. When individuals give power to a clipboard, power corrupts quickly. And if your name ends up on the list, don't hesitate. I accessed the last drive because I had to. It revealed that the same blueprint I had helped create long ago had come back around and turned on me. They had used my own language to construct a trap. I unveiled it. I filed. I published. They had assumed I was the variable that could be broken. They remembered two things. I understand how these systems are constructed, and I had help. If you're watching this because the HOA in your town seemed bigger than it should, or because a volunteer group got militarized, or because a neighbor's compliance looks like a shakedown, document it. Call real law. Get a record. Reach out. Don't let a clipboard become a regime. When you push open a door with your name on it and discover a blueprint that worked against you using your signature, nothing goes back to normal. It shatters. The second half isn't now about one raid anymore. It's about creating a prototype out of evidence and seeing the system recoil, then swing back. Here's what's been happening since I went live. First, the short-term fallout. My email became a war room. Reporters, former contractors, anonymous complaints, and hostile neighbors clogged it. Some requested assistance. Some threatened lawsuits. A few sent threats of death. The high-volume calls were the ones from individuals who said, "We saw this too." Small towns in 3 states. Drone video. Emails like those in Karen's folder? There was a pattern that developed quickly. Shell nonprofits, innocuous named contractors, neighborhood volunteer enforcement teams trained on low-cost simulators and distributed laminated rulebooks. The same logo I discovered torched into the dirt appeared on other properties. It wasn't an isolated incident. Second, the legal and administrative response. The county attorney demanded it all. I provided drives, timestamps, chain of custody logs. The whistleblower complaint got a federal office moving. They opened an inspector general review and subpoenaed contractors. For a week, it felt like the world was watching. Hearings, statements, someone else reading the words I'd lived and translated into exhibits. There were unexpected allies, a retired investigator who'd been stuck on a paper trail for years, a journalist who loved rural stories, a civil liberties lawyer whose last case had been about surveillance overreach. We went together and put what I'd uncovered into a timeline that prosecutors could use. But this portion isn't all legal briefs and press conferences. It's also the human cost. People who had been my friends suddenly became guarded around me. Those who had assisted in taking down signs months earlier needed space. Some wrote back full of apology and explanation. A few never contacted me again. The social ostracism Karen orchestrated had long-term effects. Homes that had once exchanged casseroles now boasted padlocked gates. Feed shops replaced ledger entries. A neighbor who'd constructed my barn phoned to report he was frightened. His voice broke as he confessed he'd signed months earlier, trading a name to protect his family. He wasn't alone in having been intimidated. Third, escalation. Revealing the program didn't shut it down, it sped up sections of it. The leak pushed some contractors back, but others went underground and nastier. Black cars continued to drive around my property. A brick with a printed message was left on my gate one morning. We moved to Phase 4. No signature, only the same X mark penned in black paint. A county GIS feed had been entered by someone, and the zoning comments modified to mark my parcel as contested. A low voice called from a former co-worker. They're reorganizing. We kicked one hornet's nest and a dozen opened elsewhere. I was familiar with the program having failover plans. I'd read them in that drive. Phase 4 contingency was for when exposure pushed them to speed up. So I shifted my strategy. Going public had been required in order to compel oversight, but it also made me public in ways I hadn't anticipated. The defense needed to go legal and tactical. Legally, FOIA requests, contractor invoice subpoenas, bank wire transfers, and nonprofit filings, demanding that a grand jury consider who funded the shells. Tactically, I toughened my perimeter, but I also expanded my reach. I assembled a coalition of landowners, privacy groups, veterans with battlefield experience, and data analysts who could follow IP hops and money trails. We took their disconnected dots and created a map similar to Karen's, but ours had names, bank accounts, and phone numbers on it. There were little victories. A contractor's contract was invalidated following a county review. A nonprofit's tax-exempt status was put on hold pending investigation. Karen's inner circle collapsed as pressure brought about by subpoenas intimidated backers. The retired intelligence officer whose autograph rested on Phase 2 documents was subpoenaed quietly. He initially refused, then struck a limited cooperation agreement. That transaction brought on another name, another, and gradually the size of the project was revealed. Not one rogue HOA, but a syndicate of opportunistic builders, local agitators, and at least one organization happy to perform psychological operations on rural populations for profit and policy trials. But each triumph was followed by payback. A smear campaign against me, my own videos cut from context and edited, invitations to community safety forums that would be filled with people trained to shout down whistleblowers, anonymous op-eds accusing me of lying for clicks. Someone hacked into images of my bank account balances and released them to a local paper with the headline, "Questionable Finances Behind Callahan's Campaign." It stung. It was no surprise. It was cartoonish as well relative to what was next. They attempted to weaponize pattern recognition against me. Members of the same network tried to build a dossier that hinted at me having extremist contacts, labeling me as threatening to public safety. That dossier ended up being published within a forum utilized by local law enforcement for threat assessment. Langston and the county attorney battled to have it labeled as disinformation. That battle purchased time, not security. My request for federal protection came after an unmarked sport utility vehicle tailed my truck for 2 consecutive nights and somebody shot through my mailbox. No one was hurt, but the message was delivered: escalate and we will make you move. Which leaves us with the calculus of self, how far to go, how much to expose, and when to tug on which threads so you do not tug yourself along with them. I had learned to be exacting. We dumped documents in batches, each batch paired with a targeted narrative matched to a request for oversight. We anonymized neighbors, covered up names of likely informants who could get hurt. We cooperated with reporters who understood how and when to file for records without burning sources. It was glacial, measured, and infuriatingly bureaucratic in a manner that played to the advantage of the opponent. Bureaucracy was their home turf. Getting bureaucracy to work for us was like slow justice. The greatest triumph resulted from one quiet source, an accountant for a contractor. He'd been paid in shell accounts and, when subpoenaed, his ledger revealed wire payments to a consultancy in D.C. Through forensics, the payments were traced back to a tiny grant program whose letterhead corresponded to stamps in Karen's binder. That was the connection federal prosecutors needed to prove coordinated intent, not a rogue HOA individual, but a pilot program that had sprung from academic white papers into operational fraud. We were still a long way from closure. The hearings would drag on for months. Criminal indictments would come and go. Additional folders would be confiscated and cracked. Names were called. But the public map was out now. The phrase operational rural management no longer had acronyms to hide behind. Those who had been targeted contacted one another, creating their own survivor network. They exchanged videos, timelines, and above all, the realization that they were not isolated. And yet, the culmination of this section is not a culmination. The documents we opened up showed us that Phase 4 had contingency triggers that spread wider than the seizure of property. There were agreements regarding market pressure, regarding channeling subsidies, regarding legal harassment that seemed like governance. They had playbooks for community reintegration and templates for exit achieved that incorporated escrow transfers and relocation assistance, the bureaucratic version of eviction by attrition. So here's what you need to know now. Revealing a map doesn't cause the road to vanish. It means there are more eyes on it. It means the next steps are public and trackable. It means the players become smarter, which is why the following section is important, because anyone at the top of that list knows that they've been watched and watched alter behavior. If you're expecting the next report, there's more. The grand jury testimony, the sealed indictments, the man in D.C. who wouldn't talk, and the encrypted drive that changed hands 3 times before finally emerging. The trail goes north and west, into institutions you'd assume would protect citizens. And that's the real danger. The day the indictments were unsealed, the courthouse lobby felt more like a theater lobby before a blockbuster premiere. Reporters jostled for position, photographers whispered about angles, and deputies kept repeating, "Stay behind the ropes." All of them weren't aware of what was inside the sealed envelopes set to see daylight. I did. I'd received enough drafts to realize the tale wasn't solely rogue HOA gone wild. It was institutional. The clerk announced the names. Not only Karen, not only her patrol unit, 6 contractors, 2 county-level consultants, 1 regional coordinator whose LinkedIn profile stated he specialized in community cohesion strategies. Each indictment outlined wire fraud, impersonation of a federal officer, unlawful surveillance, conspiracy. And then the bombshell, a federal charge related to unlawful psychological operations on civilian populations. Those words weren't even supposed to be in the public lexicon. The audience gasped. Cameras snapped. My stomach plummeted. Because once certain words are said out loud, they can no longer be taken back. The actual twist? The indictments weren't complete. They were strategic. Some names were glaringly absent. Individuals I knew were among those drives. Individuals with scope over county boundaries. A lawyer buddy leaned over and whispered, "They're holding them out." Bigger fish, greater leverage, it made sense. But to me, it sounded like room to escape for those with the means to vanish. That evening, revenge began anew. My trail cams picked up 2 guys in nondescript jackets sweeping the north fence line, not bumbling like Karen's group, military style. One had a box that looked like a satellite dish, signal sweeper most likely. The other scanned the perimeter with military-like intensity. I remained hidden, lights out, cameras rolling. They didn't trespass to mess with things. They tested response time. And the following morning, it wasn't a note or a brick. It was a letter in my mailbox, a federal-type envelope without a return address. 1 page inside. You think you've charted it all. You've charted only the decoys, Phase 4. I went directly to Langston. He read it, his jaw clenched, and said, "They're still alive. And they're saying you're a variable they have not yet neutralized." The hearings descended into chaos after that. Defense lawyers insisted Karen's HOA empire was merely quixotic zealotry, a power trip too far. They characterized her as a suburban despot with a clipboard fetish. Convenient, because every time prosecutors referenced the federal funding connections, objections flew. Irrelevant, speculative, outside jurisdiction. Judges upheld more than they overruled. The truth was in print, but the court was drama and the crowd wasn't prepared for the entire play. Outside the court, the crowd divided. Some viewed me as a whistleblower revealing a shadow program. Others accused me of being paranoid, a countryside conspiracy salesman. Hashtags emerged. Yes, HOA horror. Esque clipboard coup. For each supporter, there was a troll account sharing photoshopped images of my house, asserting I faked it all. Disinformation campaigns weren't defense, they were offense. Here's where things got weird. A reporter slipped me a draft of a grant memo I hadn't previously seen, with the notation, Pilot Cohesion Initiative Phase 3. It included new towns. Not Simmons Valley, not even my state. Towns hundreds of miles away, with demographics that were creepily familiar. Low population density, high land ownership, weak press presence. They weren't ending the program. They were climbing it. I couldn't sleep that night. Each groan of the house became boots on gravel. Max walked the porch, hackles up. I watched drone videos, searched drive directories, and wrote maps till morning. The sensation wasn't paranoia, it was clarity. If this weren't halted now, other ranchers, other farmers, other families would see the same playbook. Clipboard, then compliance, then control. There's a point in every battle where defense isn't sufficient. You can construct fences, set up lights, pile up evidence, but if all you ever do is respond, the initiative remains theirs. That note in the mailbox, "You've only charted the decoys," seared a hole into me. It was a challenge, but also an admission. If there were decoys, then there must be a center, a nerve. And if I could locate that nerve, perhaps I could make them jump. I didn't go hunting in single file. That would have been suicidal. I constructed a discreet coalition instead. A mosaic of partners who had no reason to trust one another, save that each had been burned by the same shadow network. There was Langston. He wasn't just a sheriff with jurisdiction. He was a man whose patience for bureaucracy was wearing thin. He gave me what he could without stepping over the line. Intel on which judges leaned toward transparency, which ones folded under pressure. He warned me when unmarked visitors came sniffing around county records. Second was Clara, a journalist I'd met in a courthouse hallway. She was a bloodhound with instincts and a cynic with a too many stories left in committee mentality. She needed documents, not stories. I produced redacted copies of the drives, enough to print out but not enough to set sources afire. A week later, she was printing out timelines of names, shell nonprofits, and invoices for the very same contractors the indictments danced around. Third was a man I'll call Hawk, retired military intelligence. Gray hair, slow walk, but when he sat down, he mapped networks like a cartographer of war. He looked at Karen's binders, the Phase 4 contingencies, and muttered, "This isn't amateur hour. This is doctrine watered down for contractors." He traced 3 of the shell groups to a single consultancy in D.C. Not some anonymous acronym, but a firm that had marketed community cohesion strategies to state governments for years. And then there was the wild card, neighbors who'd previously shunned me. One who confessed they'd been forced into compliance. Another who handed me a flash drive Karen's men had left behind on one of their surveys. Encrypted, haphazard, but in it was gold. GPS coordinates linked to Phase 3 rollouts. Towns I had never even heard of. Cross-state, cross-jurisdiction. The map expanded beyond Simmons Valley. That was when offense began. We attacked in waves, each timed precisely. Clara released one batch of invoices on a Monday morning, just as a state oversight hearing opened. The names couldn't be dismissed. Hawk delivered a senator's aide a packet documenting the D.C. consultancy's footprints in 3 states. Langston spilled enough gossip to validate Phase 4 wasn't make-believe. He'd overheard a call mentioning compliance escalation in the Midwest. Each release drew blood. Contractors scrambled. Some websites disappeared overnight. Shell nonprofits ceased to exist on paper. A few consultants quietly resigned, but each response validated the pattern. We weren't striking random actors. We were compelling a network into the open. That's when the backlash became surgical. First strike, cyber. My accounts were bombarded with phishing attempts so realistic even Hawk whistled. One email had metadata tracing to a server from a well-known contractor. Another hid spyware within a forged subpoena. If I hadn't had assistance, they'd have sucked out my files. Second strike, legal. A defamation lawsuit appeared on my desk, filed by a group I'd identified publicly. It required $2 million in damages. Their complaint? That my whistleblowing threatened community safety programs. Suffocating irony. My attorney laughed when he read it. This is not about money. It's about slowing you down. He was correct. Third strike, physical. Surveillance cars proliferated. Unmarked SUVs with plates registered to rental fleets. Drones flying at 3 a.m. One evening, Max barked so fiercely that I picked up my shotgun and spotted 2 men on the gravel road, headlights off, with long lenses trained on the house. They drove off in a hurry, but left the sensor spike planted in the ditch. Hawk uncovered it and muttered, "They're creating a profile. Not if, but when." It dawned on us. If we didn't ramp up quicker than they did, we'd suffocate in attrition. So we doubled down. I took the battle national. Clara sold the story to a big outlet with resources to protect it legally. They gave her a team. We put together a dossier. Financial threads, decrypted memos, first-person testimony from other towns. Hawk wrote up an analysis that explained Phase 4 in simple terms. Infiltration, compliance, pressure, correction. The same playbook each time, only repackaged for each community. The outlet published it as a feature splash headline on Sunday morning headlines. The Hidden War for Rural America, inside the HOA program that wasn't. It trended within hours. Governors were demanding answers. Federal agencies were denying involvement. Congressional aides were calling Clara, requesting copies. And then the silence. The kind that makes you know your story struck too close. Phones rang off the hook, but doors began closing. HOA requests that once came back in weeks now took months. Subpoenas met national security exemptions. Hawk warned me, "You've embarrassed someone who doesn't like sunlight." The most chilling sign came from the Phase 4 drive itself. One file we'd overlooked contained a variable risk index. Names ranked red, yellow, green. Mine was red. Clara's name appeared in yellow. Hawk's wasn't even on the list, which somehow made it worse. It meant they didn't see him as a variable. They saw him as a known quantity. One evening, I sat on the porch with cold coffee, waiting for headlights to creep down the ridge road. Max nudged my leg with his, fidgety. The buzzing of a drone drifted over the field. I considered what the man in the holding cell had muttered. "You're the prototype. If I was the prototype, then others would come. And if others came, Phase 4 wasn't merely testing compliance. It was testing resistance. So this is where the offense really started. We ceased treating this as my battle and began creating a community of survivors, ranchers, teachers, store owners. Those who'd discovered the same laminated signs, the same mock patrols, the same observation. We linked them. We exchanged proof. We ensured they knew that they weren't alone. Because if Phase 4's strategy was to separate targets so that they cracked, our counterintuitive move was never stand alone. The next phase wasn't about Simmons Valley anymore. It was about revealing all the rollout towns on that encrypted map before the clipboard army arrived at their gates.